In this video, I want to talk about timer 1 specifically. Timer 1 is a 16-bit counter, and at the heart of the timer is this 16-bit counter. The output of the 16-bit counter is uh, always stored in this register called T count for timer count. And this T count is a 16-bit number, right? Which means that it can take values between 0 to 65535, which is 2 to the power 16 minus 1. Okay, so that's the um, that's the output that you can have. This counter is, of course, uh, the input to the counter is a clock, and that clock comes through a prescaler which divides the clock by a number n. Okay, so the system clock is 16 megahertz, and at the output of the prescaler you get a clock which is 16 megahertz divided by n. And in timer 1 this n can take values 8, 64, 256 and 1024, and you can change the clock to a slow clock or a normal clock depending on how you set your prescaler. Okay, so how do I time events using timer 1? Okay, so let's take two examples. Okay, in the first example, here's what I want to do. Let's say in my microcontroller I have this pin, and this pin is connected to some device which is giving an input. Okay, so let me call so this is an output device and it's giving a digital input at pin 1. Okay, and I want to measure for how long this device, so this device is giving an output like this, let's say. Okay, and what I want to measure is how long is it maintaining this high signal. I want to measure this time here. So how can I do that? So one way to do that would be to, as soon as we reach a high here, as soon as we reach this particular point, what I can do is I can reset timer 1. That means I can set my T count equal to 0, and then I let the timer go. Okay, it just starts counting and it keeps counting till I reach the end of 1. Now, don't worry about how we will manage this interface between the timer and this input. We'll look at that later. But just focus on the timer now. So we have at the starting of this one, we started the T count. We reset the timer, made T count equal to 0 and started the timer. Okay. And at the end of the timer, we stop the timer, or what we do is we read T count, and let's say we store it in a variable called, let's say, count. Okay, make count equal to T count. Now what is the time that has elapsed? It's fairly straightforward, right? So if I want to find out the time, what is it going to be? So time is going to be count times the clock, the time period of the clock that is going as an input to my timer, which is basically, let's call it T timer. Okay, which could be the same as 16 megahertz, or it could be 16 divided by any one of these numbers. And that's how I have found out that this particular time. Hopefully that makes sense.